In this demo, I want to go ahead and take a look at the basic structure of an HTML document. And before we get started with that, there's a variety of text editors that you can use for this course. So Atom is one choice, Visual Studio Code is another choice, Notepad++ is another choice. But for the purpose of the demos that I'm going to produce in these screencasts, I'm going to be using the Atom text editor. It's available on whatever platform you're working on, and it's available for free. So Atom is the choice that I'm going to be using. And if I head out to a browser, so I'm just going to head out to Chrome, and I'm going to open up a browser window, and I'm going to search for Atom text editor. I'm doing my Google search. It'll take me to atom.io. And that's where I can download that. And it figures out what operating system you're using. You can download it and install it. It's a great text editor for this course in particular, but it's going to take you a long way in your software development. Some of the features that are in Atom we're not necessarily going to use for this course, but it's a full-featured editor for HTML, for CSS, for JavaScript, for all of those things. So this is the text editor that I'm using in class. So if you want to follow along and use the same text editor, that's what we're using. So for the first example, I want to go ahead and focus on how simple an HTML document can be. So obviously we can get complex and build complex websites, but for the very first demo, I want to talk about how simple this can be. Okay, so if we're talking about simplicity, an HTML document is going to have tag pairs. Okay, so the first tag pair that we need when we create an HTML document is this beginning and ending HTML tag pair. Okay, so all of our HTML documents are going to have this. It kind of signifies the beginning and end of an HTML page. Okay, so we're always going to have that. In addition to that, we're always going to have head, beginning and ending tag pairs, and certain things will go into the head section, like your page title, references to external files and things like that. But for the purpose of keeping this simple, just know that we're always going to have a beginning and ending head tag pair. And you'll notice that I indented that. So the indentation makes things really readable and easy to read. So I want to make sure that when I have this nesting relationship, so the HTML tags are going to be the beginning and ending, and then everything inside of it is going to be kind of in a parent-child relationship. So the head section is a child of our HTML document. And then the other thing that we're going to need is a body. So a beginning and ending body tag. Okay, so this is the basic HTML structure that we're going to have for all of our HTML documents. Okay, so we have beginning and ending tag pairs. Our container is this HTML document. And then we have two other containers, but they're nested under our document. So the head is a container, our body is a container, and those are nested inside of our HTML document. This is the most basic HTML document you can have. From this, you can create really complex stuff. But if I'm just talking about how do I get started, this is how I get started. This is the template for creating an HTML page and actually rendering some content. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and save this file, and I want to view the file. And at this point, we just have kind of our container tags. And our container tags don't actually produce any content on a web page. So we're going to be uninspired by this HTML page, but it's a nice starting point. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'm going to save it on my desktop. So I'm going to create a new folder called example1. So I create the folder, and then the file name, I'm going to choose the file name that I want to use. That's how I'm going to reference the HTML page in my browser. I'm going to reference it as index.html. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save it. And then what ends up happening is over here on the left-hand side, I have a project folder, and it allows me to view my project and all of the files in it. Okay. In addition to this, so the Atom text editor, I'm I have a couple of plugins that I have, and I'll show you an example of the plugins. If you want to attempt to install the plugins, great. If you don't, that's okay too. I'll show you a couple of different ways we can access this HTML page. So if I go to my packages, I have this Atom live server, and I can start the server. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start the server, and you'll see in my browser, I'm at 127.0.0.1/3000, and then there's no file name there, but I'm going to go ahead and type in index.html because that's what I named my file. And what I'm rendering here is my file that I created. And like I said, you're going to be uninspired because there's no content. It's just the shell. It's those container objects in HTML. We're rendering our web page that we created. It's not very exciting, but this is the web page that we created. Okay, so I'm using that Atom live server. And the way I would get that is under Atom, for me, there's preferences. And then I can install packages. And the package that I want to install is this Atom-live-server. Okay, so I've installed that package. If I'm not using a Mac, if I'm using Windows, this packages option will be in a different location. And I want to say it's under your edit menu and under preferences. Okay, and I could be wrong on that path to where your settings are. You're going to have to play around with your menu a little bit. But on a Mac, it's under your preferences. On Windows and on Linux, it's going to be under your preferences, but I believe your preferences is in a different menu item. So that's that Atom live server that's allowing me to access this file. The other way I can access the file is if I go over to my Finder, and Finder is really the equivalent to Windows Explorer if you're a Windows user. I have the file saved in this example1 folder on the desktop. I can just double click on this file and it'll render, and it gives me the path and it tells me that's index.html. You'll notice these files look the same. Okay, and they don't look exciting at all. It's because we don't have any content in our HTML document, but we do have an HTML document. Okay, so let's create something that's going to show up on our web page. We want something to actually display to our users. So we're going to use our first tag that's going to create some content. So we have our HTML containers, we have our head containers, we have our body containers, but now we're going to actually have some HTML that produces something on the screen. So the easiest way to do that is I'm going to use an H1 tag. An H1 tag is a heading that's big and bold. So these H tags, they go from H1 to H6, H1 being the biggest, H6 being the smallest. And we'll learn more about these tags as the semester goes on, so don't worry too much about it. But this H1 tag is a big, bold headline, and the way I'm going to produce content is I'm going to put some text inside of the beginning and ending tag pair. So I always have beginning and ending tag pairs, but this is a tag pair that expects some content, and the content is going to get rendered as big and bold text. So usually software developers will use the example Hello World. My version of Hello World is the Cubs sting because I'm a Brewer fan. So I've saved that file. So I hit save. I just used a keyboard shortcut to save, and now you'll notice that when I render that file, I get Cubs stink in big and bold text. Over here on that file, I actually have to refresh the page to get that big and bold text. But I'm looking at the same file regardless of how I got there, whether I'm using the Atom live server or I just accessed the file off the file system. Okay, so this is an example of an HTML tag that produces content. Another example of an HTML tag that would produce content is I might want to use an image. So I'm going to just do a Google search for a Brewers logo. Like I said, I'll stick with this theme that the Cubs stink. I want an image, and I want to render that image on my web page. So I'm going to go out and do a Google search for a Brewer logo. So Brewer logo. And I'm just going to grab one of the images. I'll grab the old school logo, so I'm going to save the image. I'm going to save it in my same directory that I'm working in. So here's brewers.png. So that file's saved. If I go back over to Atom, you'll see that that file exists in the same directory. And now I want to render that image on the page. So I'm going to use an image tag. I'm going to set the source equal to brewers.png. And with an image tag, if I'm using that same consistent approach of I have a beginning tag and then I have an ending tag, you'll notice there's nothing really in between. I have enough information to render the image by just saying this is the image that I want to render. I set the source attribute. I have enough information there. So instead of having a beginning and ending tag, what we have is a self-closing tag. So this represents both the beginning and ending of that tag, and then there's nothing in between the beginning and the end. So we make a self-closing tag. So it's a little bit different syntax. The other new concept here is this idea of an attribute. So in order to render an image, I have to let the browser know which image. And the way I do that is by specifying where's the image that I want to render, where is that located, what's the file name and where's it located, and I do that with a source. So I set the source equal to the image that I want to render, and the pattern for that is I have the attribute equals a value, and then the value is always going to be in quotes. And it doesn't matter if the quotes are single quotes or double quotes, but it's always going to be in quotes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. So I save it, and then I head back over to my browser, and I can see that I have that image now in my web page. And you can see over here that I have that image in my web page. Okay, so this is the basic structure and workflow that I would be using to generate an HTML page. So for this very first example, all I really want you to know is that whenever we're building an HTML page, we're always going to start with this template of having beginning and HTML tags, beginning and ending head section nested inside of it, beginning and ending body section nested inside of it. And then once I want to produce content, I use various HTML tags within the body, and that's what's going to get rendered out to my browser.